This is Shredheads with Chris on 89.7 FM.
Yeah, welcome to another episode of Shredheads with Chris, their host with the most, who'd rather be dead than not be able to shred. We got yet more great music, and we're giving a proper salute to those around Western Australia and the world who are masters of 6, 7 and 8 strings. Now tonight's guest, he's one of Perth's premier axemen. That should be a comic book series, shouldn't it? He's been rocking Perth for about 10 years now on many stages and in many genres, whether it's the most complicated of metal or he's making you gyrate to reggae grooves. His name, Daniel Wiggins, of the Daniel Wiggins Group. Well, our guest is here. He's been performing around town for many years now and can turn his hand to many styles, whether it's Joe Satriani or blues or funk. He's done it all. Welcome to Shredheads, Daniel Wiggins.
Hey Chris, thanks for having me on. And thanks for the introduction too. You make me sound like I know something.
Sounds like you know a lot of things about guitars, mate.
That remains to be seen. It's all relative, I suppose. I know what I need to know for now, I suppose.
Now, I'm picking up an accent, so can you mind telling our listeners where you're originally from?
Absolutely. So I'm from the south of England. I was born in Buckinghamshire, actually, and grew up mostly in a village near Oxford. And we moved out to Australia, me and my family, about 15 years ago. So I'm pretty much 50-50 between the UK and Australia as of this year, actually. 15 years in each. So, but I suppose, yeah, I've kept most of the accent. It's probably softened a bit over the years, but who knows? I would rather not go back and dig out any old videos or recordings of me from then. But yeah, that's where I started sort of my musical journey, as it were. And it's been interesting to see the differences between certain cultural things in music between the UK and here, at least from a teenage perspective. And but yeah, that's where I come from.
So it sounds like you've been in several bands over the years in 2 countries, from what I can gather. So exactly what bands have you been in?
Well, so through secondary school, I played in bands all throughout. So I started playing when I was about 11, and then straight into writing music and performing. And but my first, I suppose you could call, semi-professional type of a band would have been one called Morphica, which was a Perth-based progressive metal band, which I believe you're familiar with.
Yeah, I used to see Morphica. I think it might have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, it would have been, I believe it was 10 years ago that I joined, more or less. Yeah, so, they had been around for a period of time before that. I was aware of them in my late teens. They had another guitarist then, and he left, or they parted ways, and then I auditioned towards the end of 2012, perhaps, and so that was the beginning of, I suppose, my emergence onto the local scene as a non-high school musician. From there it's just gone from all sorts of different bands from different styles and different walks of life. From Morphica, I ended up in a band called Dillip and the Davs, which was more of a reggae ska band at the time, and I was with them for about 6 years and played tons and tons of gigs, and that was a totally different experience. And through that, I was afforded many opportunities to do fill-ins and work with other musicians particularly around the Fremantle scene and also the Southwest scene. There's so many great musicians down in Denmark and Margaret River and places like that. And I certainly learned a lot through all of that. And then at this point in time, my two bands are essentially my own solo band, the Daniel Wiggins Group, and a blues rock band called the Whiskey Nips. And in both cases, they, I feel, appeal to me most as sort of, what underpins me as a musician, rather than so much me being a jack of all trades, as it were.
Now, clearly you've been performing for quite some time. So when did you actually get into guitars?
So for my 11th birthday, I got some money, and I was given two choices. I was able to either get some PS2 games or buy a guitar. And actually, I initially chose the PS2 games, but my mum forced me to get the guitar, which in hindsight was very wise. And so that's where it started. I had a few older friends who were also musicians. I've always had older friends for some reason or another, and they sort of got together with me and we put together a band. And I did my first pub gig when I was 12. So that's where it all started, and I've been pretty much doing it ever since then. So most of my life, at least 2/3 of my life, I'd say.
You weren't even a teenager when you played your first gig.
That's right. Yeah, it was great. And also the first song we played at that gig was an original song of mine. So I started as I meant to go on, I suppose. And I've often reflected on that period of time in particular and that gig. And, the feeling that you get from when you finally get out onto a stage with your friends and you play in front of a crowd, it's like I've been chasing that same feeling ever since then, I think, and trying to get back there. It was quite an experience to be there, and very fond memories indeed.
And what year would this have been?
That would have been 2004, I think. 2003, 2004, something like that.
Now, that's pretty similar time to when I first picked up a guitar for the first time. So what guitarist would have influenced you?
Well, there was the stable of people that were out at the time. I think The Darkness had just put out their first album. Muse were really, Absolution just come out, so I was quite into that. Nirvana was still quite popular among my cohort. But to be honest, really the first guitarist that made a big impact on me was Steve Vai. That changed my entire musical landscape, not just from a guitar perspective. I mean, that's obvious, but also, his compositional approach. A lot of his music is incredibly rich harmonically and rhythmically, and it primed my ears for a lot of what I would discover later on, whether it be Frank Zappa or modern classical music or even sort of Bulgarian music. So many things that I probably wouldn't have had the ears for had I not spent those formative developmental years listening to all this weird Steve Vai music. So yeah, he was the beginning. But there was plenty of other. I mean, there's so many people that have influenced me. But if I had to single it out, he would be the number one, I suppose.
I think I've seen a cover of you covering Taurus Bulba on YouTube somewhere.
Oh wow, yeah, that would have been a few years ago. I probably still had hair back then. No, I was really into it. Actually, at the time, I knew the entire Fire Garden suite note for note from start to finish, because I was just obsessive. I'd sit down and just learn. Yeah, I'm going to learn. Find the hardest thing I can find and just try and push myself to learn it. And it was great. It's great when you have the time to do that. I wish I still could do that nowadays. But yeah, I'm flattered that you that you noticed that. That was a long time ago, man.
Yeah, I mean, I've been following the local scene for a long time.
Yeah, well, actually, interestingly, now that you mentioned that video, at the time of the sort of, I guess, the Morphica era, that video may have been partially responsible for me getting into the band, now that I think about it, because I didn't really know anybody. But that was the time of like the Perth Bands Forum. I don't know if you remember that internet forum that was going back in those days.
Yeah, I used to use that forum quite a bit.
Oh, right, yeah. It seems like a lot of people did, and that's how a lot of us made connections, or certainly that's how I put myself out there. I just posted some videos on there, some Dream Theater videos and Steve Vai stuff, and that's how I got hooked up with the guys in Morphica. And so actually that video probably did a lot for me in hindsight.
Okay, it's been great talking to you, but we got to play some songs and clear some commitments. Thanks, Dan. We'll be back after the break. Don't you go anywhere. That was Stinger by the Daniel Wiggins Group. And we've got Daniel Wiggins with us right here on Shredheads on 89.7 FM. Okay, Dan, so you've actually performed in bands that play varying types of music, like Morphica was progressive metal, Dillip in the Davs was more of a reggae funk band. So what have you taken from each particular genre?
Yeah, it's a good question. So coming up through the progressive rock and progressive metal scene, I suppose the obvious things to point out would be, you know, the more extreme end of the technical aspects of playing music. But I mean, I was sort of pursuing that of my own volition anyway. The main thing I got from Morphica was actually through mixing with musicians that were far more schooled, particularly in the case of Jeremy, the keyboard player. You know, he's got a degree in classical composition, and he's quite an amazing musical mind, and it was very inspiring to me, particularly as a 20-year-old or whatever I was at the time. And I had really no solid grounding in music theory at that point, but he would occasionally take me aside and he'd show me interesting things like counterpoint or harmonic or melodic motion and all these little seeds of ideas. And then I found over the years a lot of what I've discovered about the mechanics of music have been from that influence of his. So I would say that would be a big part of it. But moving on to when I joined the Davs, that's a totally different skill set. That was on a musical level. It's, you know, how do you make a room full of people really groove and dance and get into what you're doing, and how do you perform to a large audience? How do you lock into a rhythm section and find your pocket, your unique sort of role within that unit? That was a really big learning curve. You know, on the surface, playing a reggae groove might seem simple in principle, playing, you know, on the 2 and the 4 with the guitar skank, but it's a really, really deep discipline, far deeper than I could ever hope to really go with it. But you know, you learn a lot about beat placement and just groove and listening to the drums in a totally different way, because the drums are really the melodic instrument in a reggae groove. The snare drum in particular, that's the melody in the unit. So it's a very different way of approaching it. But through playing with them for so many years and playing so many gigs and festivals and supports and things like that, it's the main thing I took from that was the craft of just being a musician, how to communicate with people, getting your gear sorted out, being reliable. I was always pretty reliable, but there's a lot that goes along with being in a band besides just playing. In fact, the playing part is almost at times insignificant. You've just got to be a good all-round muso, and that just takes experience. And that's what I got from that. So those would be the two main things. And then, as I said before, from that band, I had the opportunity to meet loads of people, and I did lots of fill-in gigs and things for a while, and that was a great lesson in how to learn large volumes of music that you don't know in a very short space of time, and being able to execute them well enough so that you still get paid at the end of the night. So lots of varying kind of skill sets that have been afforded from dipping my toe into different waters and things.
Speaking of different waters, Dillip and the Davs will be playing in different venues to Morphica and vice versa.
Yeah, that's right. So, Morphica, we play typically in your larger pub venues, I suppose, metal type venues. But when I was in the Davs, it was anything from, a sit-down restaurant venue to a Blues at Bridgetown Festival main stage, or lots of the pub venues, of course. But playing regional areas is a totally different vibe to playing Fremantle, which is totally different to playing in Perth. And that was the main thing I got from that, was that I was able to play across the entire state. So you get to get a taste of such a diverse range of venues and people and patrons and some interesting experiences along the way.
Yeah, your dad's actually a bass player. He was in Dillip and the Davs as well. Have you picked up anything from him?
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, the degree to which I picked things up from him is probably unconscious to me because, I've grown up with him playing and listening to music. And, he's been responsible for turning me on to so much music. Steve Vai was one of them. He's the one that made me buy a Steve Vai album, Passion and Warfare, in the first place. But, it took me to loads of really amazing gigs when I was younger. I used to shadow him at his own rehearsals and watch what they did and kind of learn a bit about that side of things. And as far as from a musical standpoint, his time feel is on another level. He's just got fantastic groove, and he just locks into any drummer and any you almost forget he's there, which I don't mean to be like an insult, but I think that's great, is that he just he is the groove, and I'm so lucky to have a relative like that. And so I've probably learned a lot of stuff that I wouldn't be conscious of just by playing with him for a long time. And I was really, in hindsight, I'm very pleased that I opened the door to that and got him into the dabs, and that we've been able to have a musical relationship in addition to having a paternal one. It's a real blessing, honestly.
Of course, you do notice him if he's doing slap bass, right?
Well, yeah, he definitely pokes through when he does his Mark King impression. Absolutely, no, that's his forte. I mean, he's great at so many things, but that's the thing that he does that sort of makes him stand out for sure.
There aren't too many bass players that are better than Mark King.
No, not for that style. And I mean, when you pair it with the fact that he was, the lead vocalist as well. I mean, I have seen Level 42 live in Oxford many years ago, and just outstanding. I mean, the whole band were amazing, but seeing him up the front doing all that intricate syncopated rhythmic stuff while singing these pop tunes, it's not to everybody's tastes, but you have to admire the skill. It's amazing stuff.
Now, you've actually put out 7 solo albums. The first one came out in 2016. How do you think you've evolved as a guitarist since then?
Well, actually, in regard to the solo output, I think the main thing that's evolved, aside from just generally evolving as a guitar player or as a musician, as one would naturally, has just been more of an embrace of, I suppose, all the things that got me interested in guitar in the first place. So when I first started doing solo music, the first album is really an acoustic album. And I think at the time I was sort of anti doing any shredding or anti electric guitar almost at that time. And I just wanted to write, compelling songs and lyrics. And because I'm into music that's non-guitar music, as we all are. My interests are quite broad, but I suppose over the years I've sort of deduced that, well, really what I want to do is, play these long guitar solos and really dig into the instrument and place the guitar at the forefront of what I do. I'm not a singer. I sing because they're my songs and nobody else is willing to do it. And I enjoy it to a certain degree, but I'm a guitar player. So that's the main thing that's changed in that canon of work, is that over time the guitar has become more and more the focus again. Whatever style that might be, whatever conglomerate, whatever mixture of influences are in there, I suppose that's for other people to digest. But yeah, I'd say that's what it is. It's almost like a return to my roots, as cliche as that might be, but I think it's true.
Now, there's 2 projects you've got at the moment, the Daniel Wiggins Group and Whiskey Nips. Now, what can you do in the Daniel Wiggins Group that you can't do in Whiskey Nips, and vice versa?
Well, for one, it's almost like a dictatorship versus a democracy. So, a benevolent dictatorship, mind you. But the Daniel Wiggins Group, we can, any kind of whim that I have, we can sort of go with it and explore it. And the other 2 guys, Rolf and my father, they obviously bring their own sensibilities to the table, but I'm the musical director and the songwriter, and so it's like, well, today I want to do a heavy metal riff, but I also want to play this really mellow spacey kind of music, and they might all occur in the same set. So it's really just all bets are off, really, which is really good fun. But then with the Whiskey Nips, it's much more of a collaborative thing. Everybody in the band has got a very strong sort of something really strong that they offer to the sound. And, the Whiskey Nips being a blues band at the core, you have to keep a foot in the blues tradition whilst also doing whatever it is that you do. I think we've got a fairly strong rock sensibility in the rhythm section. So you want to adhere to certain conventions where possible and honor the tradition whilst forging ahead, because it's you've got to be having the correct topic of conversation. So if the band's talking in blues language, you can't suddenly start playing Lydian dominant scales and whatever it is you might otherwise do. So it's constrictive in a good way, and I like the balance between the two projects because it means that I can just be everything on the table in my own band, and then in the Whiskey Nips I can be a bit more specific about what parts of my playing I want to bring out and what parts I want to keep back.
Now, I can remember hearing Jimmy Page say that he found the blues to be very difficult to play, and that's because it's so hard to say something original.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, particularly going back a few years, my first times playing at the Blues at Bridgetown Festival, I always felt like a real imposter, a real phony, and I still am really. But because playing the blues, you've got to live the blues. I think you look at all the best blues players, including the local ones, and they've been doing it their whole lives. They are the music. I really admire blues players, but I'm not a blues player at my core. But by delving into it and digging into that tradition, there's so much to learn, and I really think it's made me a better player and a better improviser. I'm just trying my best, really, but it is hard. Yeah, Jimmy Page is right. It's a difficult thing to put your stamp on and not sound like you're just being a Hendrix clone or a Stevie Ray clone or whatever it might be.
And the thing about the blues musicians is that the lived experience is very important. It's almost like method acting. You almost have to live like a hobo to really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's right. I think I probably have lived like a hobo at some point or another, so maybe I do have some authenticity there, some pathos in the music or something. But no, you're right. It's you can't be inauthentic to a blues audience. They know straight away if you're just playing the right notes without the feeling. It's all about the feel, which again is a cliche thing, but it's 110% true. And I observe that from you can see it on an audience's face and in the way that they react to you, whether or not you're in the moment or not. So.
And also, in the world of blues and maybe jazz as well, the choice of gear is quite important, because you can't necessarily show up to a blues gig with, say, something like, a Jackson and a dual rectifier. You'd need something like a Gibson or a Fender. In terms of amps, you probably need a Marshall or maybe even a Fender amp.
Yeah, I mean, the gear is an ongoing quest, and it's I'd say gear is like a hobby aside to playing for me. I quite enjoy mixing and matching and experimenting with gear, but honestly I found with the current sort of setup that I have, I'm able to pretty much play any sort of style with the same sounds. So that's what I've tried to simplify it over the years. I used to take different amps and different guitars out for different things, but I think I've struck a good balance now where I've sort of dialed something in that is versatile enough to do it all, hopefully.
Well, I think that's just about all we've got time for. Dan Wiggins, thanks for joining us tonight on Shredheads.
Been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on. Cheers.
Damn, that's some great guitar playing. That was The End of All Things by the Daniel Wiggins Group, and you can catch them on March 19 at the Swan Basement. And there's also the Manner of Dan's other band, Whiskey Nips. You can catch them on March 12 at Settlers Tavern in Margaret River. Seriously, folks, if you're a guitar aficionado and you've never seen Daniel Wiggins live, you don't know what you're missing.